Welcome to Boots on the Ground Weekly Recap. This week, the IDF raided one of the last Hamas strongholds in the Gaza Strip, which they had set up inside the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza. More than 240 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists were arrested during the operation of Division 162 forces in the hospital area. The IDF released materials from the interrogation of one of the terrorists arrested, detailing how the terrorists operated inside the hospital. He revealed the methods used to transport equipment and weapons in and out of the hospital in order to harm the security forces. He also admitted that Hamas uses hospitals and other civilian facilities for military purposes because they know they will be safe there from an Israeli IDF attack. Speaking of Hamas using civilian facilities as a shield for their military operations, the IDF also reported hitting another Hamas base of operations set up inside a complex of buildings previously used as the Halawa school in the Jabalia area.
We'll also take a look at the remnants of Hamas rule in the Gaza Strip, including their theft of humanitarian aid shipments and their resale of the food and other supplies to the Gazan population at massively inflated prices. This criminal activity is enabled by a special gang of enforcers who execute brutal violence against anyone who tries to interfere.
On the northern border, the ceasefire with Hezbollah is fragile, and some analysts believe it might even be on the verge of collapse. The Americans confirmed that the IDF has begun a partial withdrawal of forces from southern Lebanon, but the IDF clarifies that no further withdrawals from other areas will occur until the Lebanese National Army deploys its forces in that location. And meanwhile, there are all kinds of rumors swirling around, including one that says that Israel intends to bomb Beirut airport. We'll take a look at some of these rumors.
Let's also understand that what's happening in Lebanon's political world and who exactly is the commander of the Lebanese army, emerging as a leading candidate for the presidency of Lebanon. Who is this man, and what is his stance on Hezbollah and the ceasefire with Israel?
From here, we'll continue to what happened this week on the border with Syria, as Israel continues to establish a buffer zone to protect itself.
We must talk about all the players that have entered the scene in Syria, especially Israel's concern over Turkey. Some analysts are warning that Turkey has become a direct threat to Israel, and Jerusalem must prepare for the possibility of direct confrontation. Another concern is the plans Russia might have. After Russia lost control in Syria, Putin is setting his sights on a new goal, which is disturbing for the West. And we'll also go to the farthest front with the Houthis. In the last 24 hours, the United States conducted extensive strikes in Yemen, and we'll tell you about the targets that were hit. This coming weekend, we'll have a special episode examining what the Houthis have done in the Middle East, and we'll tell you about that as well.
Yes, Mati, but first, we have some sad news from yesterday, as the bodies of two hostages who were among those Israelis kidnapped into the Gaza Strip on October 7th were found by the IDF in the Gaza Strip. The families were informed earlier today about the return of the bodies to Israel, and they expressed disappointment that they did not return alive. The number of living and deceased hostages in Hamas captivity is now 98.
Yeah, and speaking of hostages, there are also new details about the hostage deal. For starters, there is an unusual clause that may bury the agreement altogether. Negotiations for a hostage deal continue, but members of the US President Joe Biden's team are expressing skepticism about the likelihood of reaching a deal soon, saying that there are still quite a few gaps that make an agreement difficult. They made these remarks as the envoy of the President-elect Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, was expected to arrive in Doha, Qatar on Thursday to join the talks.
Don't forget, Mati, the incoming president, Donald Trump, promised this week that Hamas would experience hell if it does not release the hostages. So, as you can see, we have a lot ahead of us.
Yes, Yair, and indeed a lot. So let's dive into all the details.
I'm Yair Pinto, and this, my friend and colleague, Mati Shoshani. And this is Boots on the Ground Weekly Recap, broadcasting live from our studio in Jerusalem, the Holy City and the capital of Israel. Today marks day 460 of the war with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and all the Shiite militias in Iraq, all of which are operating under the auspices of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. And by the way, some of you have noticed that I don't include the Shiite militias in Syria in that list anymore, as Iran has evacuated all its IRGC advisors from Syria, and the Shiite militias there, who relied on Iranian support, have their hands full just surviving and don't have time to threaten Israel anymore. That's good news that one of our enemies has been knocked out of this war. But there are still threats coming from Syria, and I hope we don't have to soon add Turkey to the list of enemies we just subtracted these Shiite militias from. But we'll talk about that a bit more later in the report.
That's right, Yair. But a moment before we get into the news, I'd like to ask our viewers to help us spread the truth. One of the best ways to help us get out there is by subscribing to this YouTube channel. The more subscribers a channel has, the more YouTube circulates the videos, and this means they're more likely to be seen and watched by more people. So if you like these videos and you care about what we're doing here in Israel, take a second and pause. Make sure you press the subscribe button if you haven't done so already, because that's the best way to get the videos more circulation. It also helps you to never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. One other way you can help us is by donating to our channel by using the button here on YouTube or on our website at tbnisrael.com/give. While you're at the website, don't forget to check out the news section so you can stay informed on the latest developments between video releases.
The IDF continues operations in the northern part of the Gaza Strip alongside the advanced negotiations for a hostage release deal. Soldiers from the Nahal Brigade have stepped up the tempo of operations in Bet Hanun, eliminating dozens of terrorists in recent days, as well as capturing large stocks of weapons and ammunition. This is the area where the most intense fighting currently is happening in the Strip, and meanwhile, soldiers from the Kfir Brigade yesterday completed their mission in the Bet Lachia and outskirts of Bet Hanun area after 3 months of fighting. These forces are in the final stages of clearing the northern Gaza Strip of terrorists, and the assessment is that many terrorists are trying to flee south to fight another day. Needless to say, the IDF would rather stop them now rather than continue to have to face them later in southern Gaza. However, soldiers on the ground report that it feels like Hamas gave up on the northern Gaza Strip, as there is a dramatic drop in friction with the enemy in Jabalia and Bet Lachia. For Division 162, which has led the offensive operation in the northern Gaza Strip for the past 3 months, the operational base Hamas had set up inside the Kamal Adwan hospital in Jabalia was the last major enemy stronghold. The IDF's successes in clearing Hamas operations out of this hospital last weekend signifies the end of the operation in the city, although there are still mopping up operations to complete in the city. And during the final stages of the operation, about 20 terrorists were eliminated in exchanges of fire with IDF troops, while another 240 surrendered or were captured. The Shin Bet immediately began interrogations of these prisoners, and the information they provided was valuable in planning the next stage of the operation. Among those detained were 15 individuals known to have taken part in the October 7th massacre against Israelis, and the hospital director, who is suspected of being a senior Hamas operative specializing in anti-tank and engineering warfare tactics for Hamas. The operation began about a week before the ground troops went in with an aerial reconnaissance of the facility, starting at 3 a.m. between Thursday and Friday. This resulted in an assessment that the civilian buildings surrounding the main hospital building were filled with weapons, booby traps, and combat positions. The purpose of this arrangement was that the terrorists inside the hospital could appear to be innocent, going around their business, while the truth is that on a very short notice, they could move on these positions, grab their weapons and the ammunition, and engage against the IDF troops. It is important to note that the naval commandos from Shayetet 13, who led the raid into the hospital, found little weaponry, but there was a very large number of terrorists, the biggest group in a single place in the Gaza Strip so far, all arrested at once. Commanders from the 401st Brigade, which led the operation, said that some Hamas terrorists wore fake bandages to disguise themselves as wounded and sick, and since the IDF allowed medical staff and hundreds of hospitalized patients, as well as children and women, among the displaced who had found refuge there, to leave for the Indonesian hospital on the outskirts of the city's refugee camp, the terrorists attempted to be part of these civilians. On Tuesday of this week, the IDF released footage from the interrogation of one of the terrorists caught there, Anas Muhammad Faiz El-Sharif. During the interrogation, Al-Sharif admitted that many terrorists took cover in the hospital because they believed that the army won't attack the hospital directly, so it's a safe place for them since civilians and the patients are there. The army can't bomb it with planes, so the terrorists would move gear and weapons and ammunitions, all the arms that was going in and out of the hospital, reaching observation and patrol squads that were set out every night from the hospital. All of this information came from the terrorist that was interrogated. Inside the hospital, equipment, grenades, and mortars are distributed for tank attacks, ambushes, and tunnels underground. Fighting also continues this week in Bet Hanun, which has become the main area of IDF operations in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. In the course of these operations, it was necessary to strike at Hamas positions that had been set up inside a compound of buildings that were formerly used as the Halawa school in the Jabalia area. Hamas had used this base to plan and carry out attacks against Israeli civilians and the IDF, but before it was hit, many steps were taken to minimize the harm to civilians, including aerial observation and additional intelligence. The IDF said in relation to this incident that the Hamas terrorist organization systematically violates international law, cruelly exploiting civilian institutions and the population as a human shield for terrorist activities. The IDF will continue to act vigorously and decisively against terrorist organizations. Listen, Mati, we hear all the time from our viewers asking us how, after more than a year of intense fighting against the Hamas terrorist organization, Hamas still manages the Gaza Strip.
Yair, that is a great question, and we'll dive into this issue in just a moment. But first, I want to invite our viewers once again to click on the subscribe button if they haven't done so already, so they never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Okay, back to the story. So 15 months after October 7th, Hamas continues to terrorize Gaza's population to show who's boss in the Strip. And as far as the terror group is concerned, all means are fair game. Armed men have been documented shooting the hands and legs of bound Gazans in Khan Yunis, claiming they had stolen goods. In another video that was published in recent days on platforms affiliated with Hamas, one of the armed men can be seen brutally beating a bound Gazan with clubs. In the background, you can hear his cries of pain, but it doesn't deter the Hamas operative from continuing. This tactic, adopted by Hamas's Arrow Unit, or Shaham, has become more and more common, according to the footage coming out of the Gaza Strip. Hamas's Arrow Unit, which is subordinate to Gazan's Interior Ministry, has been active in recent months trying to display governance through violence, but it presents itself as dealing with a local crime and theft. The unit's members move around in civilian clothes and carry light weapons. Among its responsibilities is guarding merchant warehouses and markets, dealing with thieves and collaborators who help Israel loot humanitarian aid, of course according to their reports, securing aid convoys until they reach the designated warehouses, and punishing merchants who inflate prices. Formal definitions aside, the reality is different. Hamas acts brutally to establish fear among the Gazan population. It executes thieves or those suspected of collaborating with Israel in the streets. This has resulted in a kind of barely organized witch hunt against anyone Hamas's eyes fall upon, whether they're actually guilty of anything or not. They also operate a snitch line called Catch the Collaborator, where residents can rat out their neighbors and no evidence of actual wrongdoing is necessary. With a click of a button on social networks, residents can inform on anyone else, once again, without any need for evidence. Being reported on this platform is a virtual death sentence, and once again, no actual wrongdoing or evidence of anything is required. Hamas also tries to create emergency-style governance by sending out agents with orange, green, and yellow vests like municipal workers. In practice, of course, it's emergency governance that mainly deals with basic needs in the Strip and doesn't do more than that at all. Despite all of this, the public in Gaza is showing high optimism about the possibility that we're heading towards a ceasefire. In one of the Gazan refugee camps, people were seen celebrating a few days ago. Hamas, for its part, uses this to exert psychological pressure that serves its interest, including on the Israeli public.
Thanks, Mati. We'll get back later into the hostage deal. But before that, let's move on to the Lebanon front and its crumbling ceasefire. Combat Team 300, under the command of Division 146, continues to act to remove threats and terror infrastructure in southern Lebanon, according to the understandings between Israel and the internationally recognized government of Lebanon, while maintaining the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah. In recent days, this has included the discovery of 5 weapons depots containing mortar rounds, rockets, and other heavy weaponry, all of which were demolished on site along with the underground storage units. In another incident, the soldiers found a truck carrying 3 medium-range rocket launchers hidden in mountainous terrain. The truck and rockets were confiscated. Despite the tactical successes that the IDF has had, there remains a strategic threat from Hezbollah, which is battered but still on its feet. Hezbollah has other problems besides Israel, however, as its many opponents in Lebanon's domestic political arena are actively trying to defy it, and this includes running candidates openly opposed to it in the upcoming presidential Lebanese elections. Mati, you're TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst. Can you give us some analysis of the political situation inside Lebanon?
Well, of course, Yair. Let's start by looking at Lebanon, where we can't really get the full picture without also taking a serious look at what's going on next door in Syria. So first of all, the Americans have confirmed that the IDF has begun a partial withdrawal of forces from southern Lebanon, but the IDF clarifies that no further withdrawals from other areas will take place until the Lebanese National Army is deployed its forces throughout the region as per the original agreement. Division 146 withdrew from the village of Nakora a few days ago after completing a destruction of a Hezbollah underground infrastructure, including a giant tunnel that contained munitions and weapons intended for use by Hezbollah to capture the northern city of Nahariya in the western Galilee. U.S. mediator Amos Hochstein has confirmed that the National Lebanese Army has taken over responsibility for this area. This follows a similar sequence of events in the village of El Qaim on the eastern side, at the foot of Mount Dov a few weeks ago. However, in most of southern Lebanon, the IDF continues to be deployed in order to prevent Hezbollah from regrouping and approaching the border, while the Lebanese National Army is moving very slowly to implement its part of the plan to take control of the area and allow for the IDF to withdraw to its side of the border. Yair, can you tell us what positions the IDF continues to control in southern Lebanon?
Well, the IDF is present in the central sector and also in the Ayalon Valley and the ridges overlooking the valley. The IDF keeps these assets under its control due to their observation capability and fire control over deeper areas as far as the Litani River and the Tzire-Tzidon corridor. The IDF says it won't withdraw from these areas until the Lebanese army is prepared to take over and deploy there effectively.
Thank you, Yair. There's also a political dimension to all of this within Lebanon itself. Lebanon is heading towards a presidential election in the shadow of Israel's destruction of much of Hezbollah's leadership and physical infrastructure in the last war. it appears that Yosef Khail Ayoun, commander of the Lebanese National Army, might be a potential candidate for president of the country, a position that's been vacant for over a year and a half so far. For Israel, of course, this is a significant development, because Ayoun has already stated that he will not confront Hezbollah on the ceasefire issue, which grows more explosive with each passing day. His name was also raised by American sources as one of the 3 possible candidates, and even his political rival, Suleiman Frangi, admitted that Ayoun's chances of successfully dealing with Hezbollah are better than his own. Under the current circumstances, after the war and the elimination of Nasrallah, who was a major obstacle to electing a president in Lebanon by insisting on a president friendly to the Shiite community, and that considering the state of the Lebanese public and the statements by Hezbollah's new leader, Naim Qassem, it seems there is an agreement on the importance of choosing a consensus president. We'll see the impact of all of this in the coming days. If you haven't subscribed up till now, we're going to remind you one last time. So before we do this, once again, press the subscribe button. We can't express how important it is for us to make sure that everyone who watches this show subscribes, and it helps us and our message get to even more viewers. We work here in TBN Israel day and night to bring you the most up-to-date and detailed content about what's happening in Israel, and your financial help will be crucial. Click the donation button below or go to tbnisrael.com/give to support the truth.
Yes. Now, to start a report on the situation in Syria, the Saudi El Khada TV channel reported this week on an Israeli airstrike targeting the Khalkhala military airfield, resulting in a powerful set of secondary explosions as weapons and ammunition at the base blew up. So far, the IDF spokesperson's unit has not confirmed anything about this report. However, it follows an intense period of airstrikes by Israel on sites across Syria, which were known to contain strategic weapons stored by the forces loyal to the former Assad regime. This included air defense radars and interceptor missiles, military jets and helicopters, tanks, artillery, rockets, the entire Syrian Navy, and last but not least, ballistic missiles and research facilities for the development of chemical weapons. Most of these arsenals has now been destroyed, removing a very serious threat to Israel's northern border. However, a new threat is looming in the form of Turkey's decision to deploy forces into northern Syria, allegedly aimed at containing the Kurdish forces, which Turkey has long viewed as an extension of terrorist groups it has battled for decades in the southern points of its own territory, Turkey. Israel is concerned that Turkey is using this situation as a cover to turn Syria into a client state and replace both Iran and Russia at once. This prospect has been troubling senior officials in Israel's political and security echelons for weeks, and there have been discussions about it at the highest levels of the security and political echelons of Israel. Officials have said that Israel sees Turkey's moves in Syria as having a potential for sharp friction between the two countries. Preparing for the possibility of a strategic threat developing from Turkey also appears in recent reports published by the Negel Committee, which is a blue ribbon panel of experts assembled to examine security threats facing Israel and the defense budget and form a structure needed to deal with them. The report mentions Turkey no fewer than 15 times in the context of strategic shifts in the region. Among other things, the committee members write that given the obvious instability in the regional geostrategic sense, the committee assesses that the transformation experienced by the regional arena may accelerate other significant changes, such as attempts to harm the Jordanian kingdom, similar to developments in Syria, potential shifts in Egyptian and Turkish policy, including the possibility of friction arising. Mati, how do you think this might develop?
For sure, Yair, we are living in very interesting times. It seems like very recently, or just recently, Turkey was a major strategic ally of Israel, and now they're rapidly turning into the exact opposite. But this is not the only big change happening in the region at this moment. There are massive power shifts in the Middle East that also currently impact North Africa. The fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria has thrown a monkey wrench in Vladimir Putin's plans, and Russia's projects in Syria have completely stopped, leading to seek an alternative foothold in the Mediterranean basis. Now all eyes are on Libya. According to a recent report in pro-Saudi newspaper Asharq al-Awsat, Moscow has long relied on its naval base in Tartus in Syria and a nearby Air Force base to support its operations all over the Middle East and into Africa. The new administration in Damascus, led by Abu Muhammad al-Julani, indeed tried to reassure Russia, calling it an important country and saying, "We do not want Russia to leave Syria like some people want." Nonetheless, the unstable situation in Syria has led Moscow to seek alternatives, and Libya is the most obvious choice for a variety of reasons. Russia's moves have alarmed the government in Tripoli, as well as Italy and throughout the wider European Union and NATO.
We'll keep following every development on this matter. 1 second before we continue, I want to take a moment to express our deep gratitude and appreciation for all the soldiers and security forces who continue to fight tirelessly to keep Israel safe and bring our hostages back home. Mati, you and I both served in the reserves this past year, and we know firsthand the incredible sacrifices that these recruits make in their personal lives for this mission.
Absolutely, Yair. Some of these soldiers are in their 30s and 40s, yet they continue to serve, some for more than 200 days a year. Let me tell you, it's not an easy task. The challenges are immense, both physically and emotionally.
Mati, I know you, like me, benefited a lot from using Vinya supplements. Can you share with our viewers what Vinya is and how it helps?
Of course, Vinya is an innovative Israeli product line derived from grapes, or specifically from the peel of a grape, or whatever the technical word is for that.
Yeah.
It takes all the natural benefits of grapes without the alcohol and the sugar. The key substance in Vinya is incredible. It increases blood flow to the heart, to the brain, to the tissues, helping you feel more energetic and focused. And it's not just capsules. You can enjoy Vinya as coffee or tea in the morning, giving you a fresh and healthy start to your day.
I used it every day during my service, and I still do. And if you want to learn more about Vinya or try it for yourself, visit www.vinyatbnisrael.com or call 800-638-1944. Trust me, you won't regret it. Now, let's get back to the news. We now turn to Israel's most distant front, the battle against the Houthis in Yemen. After a week in which the Houthis continued to launch missiles towards Israel, the United States Central Command, CENTCOM forces, carried out a series of precise attacks against Houthi targets on Wednesday. According to the CENTCOM statement, the Houthis used these facilities to carry out attacks on U.S. Navy warships and commercial vessels in the southern Red Sea and the Gulf of Eden. There were no casualties or damage to the U.S. personnel or equipment. And meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal news portal revealed last week that the Houthi leadership in Yemen relocated to underground facilities and is avoiding the use of mobile phones for fear of Israeli assassination. According to a source close to the group's leadership, militia leaders frequently relocate and take strict precautions in light of Israel's threats to eliminate the organization's top figures.
Listen, Yair, I don't have any sympathy for them. After weeks in which me and my family were woken up almost every night by sirens indicating an incoming attack by the Houthi-launched ballistic missiles, along with millions of other Israelis, we had to race to the bomb shelters in our pajamas, and many people were hurt while running to their shelters. Even those of us who weren't hurt had a hard time getting back to sleep after these alarms, and I don't even want to think about the nightmares my children might have for the rest of their lives because of the stress and trauma this is causing them. On top of all of that, there is a massive economic damage this is doing to Israel, as these ballistic missiles attacks have caused many international airlines to delay their planes to begin flying in and out of Israel again.
1 second before we pray, Mati, for calmer days. we need to dig into the latest developments in the negotiations on the deal for our hostages to release them. They are held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But first, we have the sad duty to report that the remains of 2 hostages who were murdered in captivity were found this week. The 2 hostages were 53-year-old Yosef El-Zidana and his son Hamza, a father and son, Muslim members of a Bedouin family from southern Israel, who were kidnapped into the Gaza Strip on October 7, 2023. Hamas terrorists kidnapped the 2, along with 2 other children from the same family, from the cowshed in the kibbutz Cholit. Yosef's 2 younger children were released during one of the exchanges in the phases over the past year, leading the family to hope that these 2 would also return safely. But sadly for the families, the remains were found, and the IDF and the Shin Bet retrieved them and brought them to Israel. The IDF spokesperson's unit issued a statement that the IDF and the security forces shared in the family's sorrow at this difficult hour. The IDF and the security forces are making every effort to bring back all the hostages as soon as possible. Negotiations on a hostage deal continue, but members of United States President Joe Biden's team have expressed skepticism about achieving a deal soon. They say there are still many gaps making an agreement difficult. They made these remarks just as the envoy of President-elect Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, was expected to arrive in Doha, Qatar, to join the talks on Thursday. Israeli sources say there are still open issues and that every time we conclude something, Hamas reopens everything again. And senior Israeli officials also say it takes a long time to get answers from Hamas because of communication difficulties with the terror organization in the Gaza Strip, as well as the fact that Hamas decisions are made only by concessions between its leadership in Gaza and its leadership abroad. According to reports, Israel is demanding at least 24 live hostages out of the list of 34, and in exchange is willing to accept a 42-day ceasefire. According to Egyptian sources, the agreement will include the IDF's continued presence in the Philadelphia route and the Netzarim corridor. As for the Rafah crossing, the issue will be discussed in depth between Egypt and Israel with the United States participation. Implementation obligations decided upon in that regard will fall to the Palestinian Authority. Mati, did you see last week that United States President-elect Donald Trump threatened multiple times he'll bring hell upon Hamas if they don't release the hostages? What do you think he meant?
Listen, Yair, I'm not sure I can interpret the intentions of the incoming U.S. president, or anyone can for that fact, who promised that Hamas would experience hell if it does not release the hostages.
If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
But let's try to figure out what that could mean in boots on the ground style, as you like to say. From my understanding, he has 2 options on the table. The first is a series of a reduction of humanitarian aid to the Strip, and I think that's the most likely direction. The second option is that the Americans might put boots on the ground in the Gaza Strip, which would make the United States a direct party to the matter. And you don't say no to the U.S. I don't think there's much of a chance of that happening, for all kinds of reasons. However, as the famous quote from Yogi Berra goes, predictions are hard, especially about the future. When I look at it strategically, any Israeli exit from any of the fronts would quickly revert to the old order, which is no longer strategically viable from Israel's point of view. The war in Gaza must end sometime, but sadly, after 15 months, we haven't completed the mission, and the hostages still haven't returned.
True, Mati, and we'll continue praying for them together. I want to conclude by paying our last respects to some heroes who fell defending the State of Israel this week. The IDF spokesperson's unit announced the deaths of Staff Sergeant Matityahu Yaakov Perel, 22 years of age, from Bet El, and Staff Sergeant Kanau Kassa, 22 years of age, from Bet Shemesh, tank fighters in Battalion 46 of tracks of steel, Armored Brigade 401, who were killed in battle in Bet Hanun in northern Gaza. In the same incident, another soldier fell, whose name has not yet been released. I want to invite you, keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. But even more important, please pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
That's right. Pray for the peace of our hostages in Gaza, that they may return home safely.
Pray for the peace of our soldiers, wherever they are, in the air, on sea, on land. Pray for the peace of Israel, and most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And together, we will win this war because God is on our side.
Amen to that.